Have you ever looked at an elite unit and think to yourself, I wonder what their peak performance would be, how much I can buff them up, and how far can they go in terms of their killing power? Well, this is exactly what we're doing with the Krimson Killerz today. In this army build video, we will be buffing them through the roof with a combination of greenskin heroes. Now for the hero core, we have the Black Orc Big Boss providing a bit of an attack buff with the Brass Cleaver, and then we have the Orc Shaman coming in with the Fist of Gork to further buff up their melee attack and defense, and then Azag the Slaughter, not on a wyvern but on foot, with the Slagger Slashes providing that melee attack and leadership buff, and more importantly, Azag's art armor to compensate for the lack of defense on these elite greenskins. Their dual wielding axes might be very killy to hack apart some gits and whatnot, but they do have a relatively low defense with only 34, and the Azag's art armor will be providing that crucial buff, increasing their melee defense for a little bit more holding power, allowing them to stay alive a little longer to go and crump more gits. Now with such an expensive hero core in the middle, we have a little bit less funds for the front line, with only goblins to fill up the front line. At the back we have some orc pagans protecting the flanks with that anti-large melee attack. As for artillery, we have the regiment of renowned Hammer of Gork with that blinding effect protected by some orc pagans. And with such a dense melee core at the back, we need something light and fast, and of course, that will be our greenskin signature light cavalry skirmishers. In the front line, on the ridges of the map, the Goblin Wolf Rider archers. Mixed in with some Goblin Spider Rider archers, they will be providing that firepower to skirmish down any Tomb King mobility, and disrupt any Tomb King's missile units, including archers and artillery, by charging into melee. Now for the Tomb King's army, we have a whole front line of skeleton spears, mixed in with some skeleton warriors at the back, and even further back we have some tomb guards providing a sturdy backbone for the Tomb King's army. Now at the very back line, we have the terror and fear core of the Tomb King's Ushabti, supported by some Tomb Scorpions on each flank. A rather numerous monster core. No spellcaster here, only Tomb Prince and also the Tomb King trying to grind through the Green Tide with pure melee prowess, especially with the anti-infantry armor-piercing Ushabti. They will do great against regular greenskin units, but can they break through the dense greenskin hero and Krimson Killerz core? That's going to be a question that we'll be testing out today. And with all the army builds dealt with, let's get this show on the road and get the battle started. Now let's begin the battle with a bit of a fast forward, as the Alpine Ridge does divide the map into two large chunks with this ridiculous terrain blocking the line of sight of both armies from their enemies. However, I do have the advantage of skirmishing cavalry providing that line of sight, allowing my Hammer of Gork to provide some additional firepower, smashing apart some of these skeletons by firing over the ridge. Meanwhile, the skirmishing cavalry also trying to provide some fire support, shooting into the skeletons, but skeletons being the cheap chaff they are more than happy to absorb all these arrows so that these missile damage will not go into the more expensive constructs. Although it's not like the Ushabtis or Scorpions would really care about the arrow fire because of the lack of armor piercing, while the construct's heavy armor will mitigate most of that damage from the greenskin skirmishers. And after all that foot slogging, finally the skeleton spears have touched down on the front line, and my Krimson Killerz and character squad will be sallying out to meet them in melee combat. Charging in, they have already taken some damage from the Hammer of Gork, and now the Krimson Killerz splash attacks, they are just blending them apart with their dual wielding axes. The goblins are also charging into combat, quickly filling up the WA meter with the numbers in combat. But now the Tomb Kings have retaliated, with the characters charging into combat trying to snipe out Azag the Slaughter. But then the Krimson Killerz here are quick to respawn, being buffed up by the Azag's art armor, and there will be more buffs coming in, with some base buffs like the slashes, the brass cleaver, providing additional melee attack, and now even the Fist of Gork is dumped onto them, providing magic damage and extra melee stats. But this is not the end, as the WA meter is quickly filled up, and now the WA has begun. Let us pause the battle for a bit to appreciate the beautiful stat card of the Krimson Killerz. It is their final form. They're in the Ultra Instincts right now. They are the Killerz Crimson Requiem, as they are reaching 113 melee attack thanks to the total 20 melee attack over here, we have 24 over here, 24 more, 68 melee attack from all these buffs, turning their melee attack to a ridiculous amount. Also, the melee defense 82, as they are receiving a 48 melee defense in total from the Fist of Gork, and also the Azek's art armor. With so many stat buffs, they can basically beat every single unit on the battlefield right now. Even the Tomb King's character's melee defense is being overwhelmed, and now they're taking significant damage, being surrounded by all these armor-piercing entities and also by the greenskin heroes. Sorry, I can't really do a close-up right now as the effects are a little bit too much and blocking the camera. And with that, we have the Ushabti suffering massive losses as they are being blended away by the Krimson Killerz. Tomb Gods finally charging into combat, but it is a little too late, with the Tomb Kings and Tomb Prince surrounded by characters and Krimson Killerz already down to less than half health. Even the physical resistance provided by the Tomb Prince is not enough to hold the health of the Tomb Kings up, as the Krimson Killerz does get some temporary magic attacks from the Fist of Gork. At the back we have the Ushabti being summoned in the middle of the Hammer of Gork, but the Orc Biggins are ready to counterpunch and quickly drag them down in no time. In the front line, the Goblins are buckling, but that is expected. Instead, the Orc Biggins will be holding the line as the Goblins flee from combat. And now back to the middle here, the Tomb Prince and the Tomb Kings are going down. The Tomb Gods also quickly dropping, not long for this world either, due to the buffed up melee attacks of the Krimson Killerz. And it is not exactly favorable for the Tomb Kings anymore, as the infantry push is losing steam, a second wall is being popped, and the Goblin Wolf Riders, the Spider Riders are charging into combat, rear charging and cleaning up all these skeleton units. In the middle, Tomb Kings finally fallen, and there goes the Tomb Prince as well, leaving only Tomb Scorpion in combat and some really tattered Ushabtis and Tomb Gods. Over this flank, the only bastion of strength remains for the Tomb Kings, but with only a Scorpion and also a Ushabti, it is pretty hard for them to come back against a bunch of Orc Biggins. The anti-large attack will certainly finish off all these monsters eventually. And with that, army losses is hit, Tomb Gods are crumbling, only the Tomb Scorpion remain, but it is also not long for this world. As the Tomb King's army crumbles to dust, going back to where they belong, that is the underworld, the Krimson Killerz will march on victorious. Now let's quickly go through the army performances. For the Greenskins, you can see that basically the character squads and the Krimson Killerz did most of the heavy lifting. The rest of the army didn't really quite do much here, but the characters and the Krimson Killerz, they basically killed off 1/3 of the enemy's army when we add up their damage value. Basically 2,000 on the casters, another 1,000 on the Bob, and also 1,687 on these Krimson Killerz. So almost 4,700 damage value on all these units. With the powerful melee stats, the Krimson Killerz were able to blend through multiple Ushabti units, 2 of them at least, and then also the Tomb King, Tomb Prince, a unit of Skeleton Spears, at least 1 unit of Tomb Gods, and also in the end, since there's also a Tomb Scorpion stuck among these elite infantry and these characters of the Greenskins, the Tomb Scorpion is also dispatched. All these buff stacking is truly terrifying in a blob melee grind. Now, as for the Tomb King's faction, the skeletons basically crumbled in front of the Greenskin frontline, even against the Goblins because of that Wa buff. As for the Tomb Gods, they were not exactly the killer unit, while the Ushabti, 2 of those units being stuck on the Krimson Killerz got quickly hacked down, and the Tomb Scorpions was not able to make enough headway fast enough, especially when the front line of the Greenskins are reinforced by the Orc Biggins. Now that we're done with the army performances, let's quickly go into the army build analysis and talk about the power of a food asset buff stacking combined with the Black Orc Big Boss, Orc Shaman, and what are the possible applications of it in combat. To be honest, this build is rather simple. You grab Azek on foot, not on a Wyvern because that's extra cost, and on a Wyvern, Azak will always fly around and forced to stay away from the Krimson Killerz, unable to buff them in combat. However, on foot, accompanied by the Krimson Killerz, and with Azak providing extra leadership, extra melee attack with the Slagga Slasher, and also the occasional defensive buff from the Azak's art armor, combined with the Fist of Gork from the Orc Shaman, the Black Orc Big Boss providing that extra melee attack buff, and also immune to psychology in case you have some goblins around, these Krimson Killerz will kill. And if you're fighting some armor-piercing elite powerhouse unit, you can always drop the Scroll of Shielding onto your Krimson Killerz or use Azak's Soul Blight to lower your enemy's weapon damage. These Krimson Killerz will excel in any melee blob grind. Just like here, they're fighting a bunch of battle pilgrims and also peasants who do not have the slightest hope at breaking through their buffed up melee defense. And in contrast, the Krimson Killerz easily cut through both units of battle pilgrims without breaking the slightest sweat. And thanks to the plus 10 melee attack from Azak and another plus 10 from the Black Orc Big Boss, these Krimson Killerz can do well even against characters or large monsters, as their attack is constantly being 60 plus. Just like here, King Louen is getting ripped to shreds by all these dual wielding axes. Of course, we can't finish a build analysis without talking about the weakness of the build. One problem is that the Black Orcs loses a lot of their holding power once the defensive buffs are gone. Especially when Greenskins doesn't have healing for their infantry, you'll need to ready some reserve units, say Orc Biggins, to replace these elite Black Orcs once they run out of steam and rout from combat. Still, the Biggins and Savage Orc Biggins can still fight decently. They are a good infantry after all. They can also fight large monsters, and in the late game, the immune to psychology buff from the Black Orc Big Boss will come in extra handy, preventing any terror routes on these Biggins around the hero squad. Now you might notice that this bonus replay does not have any Krimson Killerz in sight. That's because the Krimson Killerz have a second weakness. They're not the most flexible units, being vulnerable to a kite build or artillery build, easily shot to pieces by different types of bombardment or small arms fire. So sometimes I just replace them with the Savage Orc Biggins or simply Orc Biggins for a cheaper variant to go for a wider build and also putting less eggs in one basket. This can be very handy against a lighter faction like the Wood Elves, using the massive weapon strength and aggressive attack stats on the Biggins, the Savage Orcs, the Orc Boys, the lower tier Orc Infantry to dish out the damage, as they do not need the armor piercing on the Black Orcs. And really, all you need for this green skin melee blob is just the hero squad providing those crucial melee buffs. Still, I wouldn't say this build is the most competitive overall, but can be quite fun to use, seeing your infantry getting buffed to a ridiculous level. Foot Azak is just not a competitive lord overall, and you're losing a lot of his potential by putting him on foot and not going for a wyvern. I've actually pitted this build against the War Dancer build of Aetherian, and safe to say I did not win. It was close, but Azak just didn't provide anything special other than the attack buffs, and not pulling enough of his weight in the game. Anyways, that's gonna be it for today's video. I hope you enjoy these army builds I put out on the channel, and if you want to see more, remember to hit the like and subscribe to get notified every time I upload a new video. They will be covering topics including wild army builds like this one, battle replays, and also tips and strategies for Total War Warhammer 2 online multiplayer. And if you want to send in any replays, allowing me to showcase them on my channel, feel free to drop by my Discord or send me an email with the replay file attached. I'll be sure to check them out. And that's it for today. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Tactical Lich, signing out.